and this session is You Are Eating Injustices. And our presenter today is Gabriel Allahdua. Originally from St. Lucia, Gabriel worked as a migrant farm worker in Canada's Seasonal Agriculture Worker Program for 4 years from 2012 to 2015, before leaving the program to seek permanent residency in Canada. Now a leading voice in the migrant justice work movement, Gabriel is an organizer with Justicia for migrant workers and an outreach worker, with the Neighbourhood Organization, providing services to migrant workers across southwestern Ontario. He is also the author of the newly released book, Harvesting Freedom, which is an excellent book. I read it this spring, and it was actually that which led me to seek out Gabriel as a presenter today. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Gabriel.
Hi, good morning to everyone. Please remind me, how much time do I have and how much time should we allocate for Q&A?
Well, we have until the whole session goes until 11:45. So it's a little over an hour and 15. So how much, I think at least 15 minutes would be good for Q&A. But you can, I'll give you sort of a sign if we get to 11:30, then we can move into Q&A probably.
Beautiful. Yeah. Thank you everyone for allowing me the opportunity to basically expose to you, to highlight to you, to educate you about basically the food that you eat. Once migrant workers are involved in the food that you eat, I want to tell you that there are lots and there are many injustices. I want to tell you, in Canada, there are lots of things I can tell you. Migrant workers are made invisible.
Yes.
Migrant workers are made invisible. And the way it's presented to us, let me see if I can start with that. I've been shopping for you because you're like extra special people. Be careful with your eyes. This might dazzle your eyes. This is the most expensive bag in Canada. You see how it's dazzling? That's how it's presented to us, right? And what is presented to us that way? It's buy local. That's what's presented to us. It's not dazzling with that. And when we buy local, we think of freshness, supporting the local economy, good health. You know, there's nothing wrong with that. But I want to, today, we're going to the market and we're going to buy local. Listen to that. What Canada is saying to you when you buy local, Canada is saying the people, a lot of the things that we buy, once migrant workers are involved in it, listen to that. What Canada is saying to you, Canada is saying to you, send people who are black, people who are brown, people of color. So race is tied to the things that you buy. Race. Canada is saying, I love those people of color, especially if they struggle with English. English is a second language to them. I love those people. Canada is saying, even it goes on to say, send me those people of color, they struggle with English, and if they're ignorant about labor issues and human rights issues. This is what Canada is saying when you buy local. Who are the people? People of color. Who are the people? They struggle with English. Who are the people? They don't know much about human rights issues and labor issues. Where do these people live? They live on the farm. In Ontario, when I go to those farms, at the entrance of those farms, you know what I see? Private property, no trespassing. Imagine having people living on the farm. What is the farm? Private property, no trespassing. I want to tell you, Canada consistently have programs in place that dehumanize and exploit people. If you know the history of Canada, you'd know Canada always had programs in place to dehumanize and to exploit people. From the Chinese railroad workers, Canada continued to use unjust immigration and unjust labor laws to keep people vulnerable and to exploit people. Now, when Canada tells those people to come in, people of color, people who struggle with English, and people who are ignorant about labor and human rights issues, you know what Canada is telling me? Come, you're welcome in a climate of fear. Let me talk a little about fear. And I can spend a whole day talking about fear. Now, what is what is life? What's the point of life? To live a life of fear or to live a life of hope? Let's talk about fear. Where does the workers live? On private property, no trespassing. Isn't that there some element of fear? That's one. Number two, listen to that. Not only is the employer our employer, the employer controls every aspect of our lives. The employer is our landlord. The employer is our employer. The employer is our landlord. The employer is our travel agent. The employer controls the travel agency that books our flight in and out of Canada. The employer controls how many hours you work. The employer controls every aspect of our lives. Do you see that? No. We are made invisible. We live on the farm. So we are welcome in a climate of fear. And there are lots of elements of fear. And I will get into that. Where is that happening? Where am I talking about? Right here in Canada. Canada is a country with a culture of silence. Nobody says anything. Is that an illegal or a legal program? It has the full blessings of government. It is a legal program. In fact, in some document I saw, the difference between human trafficking and the farm program is a prefix, IL. IL is the difference. Human trafficking is the illegal blah, 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 blah of people. And the farm program is the legal exploitation of it. That's the only difference. Now the question is, if something is legal, does that make it right? If something is legal, does that make it right? A little about me. In school, there were some subjects I loved, and in school, there were some subjects that I really struggled with. Two subjects that I remember struggling with was science. In science, when I saw things like DDT, I'm pretty sure you might have seen that before, DDT. It might be the longest word in the dictionary, I think, or in science, DDT. So things like that really discouraged me from studying science. Another thing I saw in science, and I did not like it, VD. In science, I saw VD. And in English, the other subject I struggled with was in English language. And spellings was one of the things I struggled with. One of the words I remember struggling with was debt. Debt. This might be an appropriate word right now with all the financial problems, the cost, high inflation. Debt might be an important word. So I used to spell debt as D-E-T. One day, my mother saw my book, and she said I didn't get it right. So she asked me to spell debt. I said D-E-T. She told me it's missing a B. I said D-E-T-B. And you remember the rest is history. Now let me go back to those things now. Let me go DDT. In science, or DDT, I struggle with it. But listen to that. In Canada, DDT simply means, in Canada, Canada is saying to Europe, I cannot deny you freedom. Canada is saying to Europe, I cannot deny you freedom. I cannot deny you rights. And the T, I cannot tie you to a farm. So what does DDT stands for in Canada? Canada is saying to Europeans, I cannot deny you freedom. I cannot deny you rights. I cannot tie you to a farm. Let me go to DET, the word that I could not spell, DET. I could not spell that. I was poor. But in Canada, what does DET stand for? The very Constitution of Canada deny migrant workers, deny. What is the D? Deny. The Constitution of Canada denies us a lot of basic human rights. Basic human rights. We are denied the right to participate in family life and community. How do you call somebody who's denied the right to participate in family life and community? Are we first class? Are we second class? Are we no class in Canada? Deny. So who is a migrant worker in Canada? D, deny. E, let me go to E. The laws that are designed to protect workers in Canada, migrant workers are excluded. E is excluded. What's another name for migrant worker in Canada? Excluded. The laws that are designed to protect workers in Canada, migrant workers are excluded from those things. Recently was a holiday, Thanksgiving. I'm pretty sure that was the time you shared the best meal with your family. Your best days in Canada are migrant workers' worst days in Canada. Was it a holiday for migrant workers? No. Were we with our family? No. Did we get a holiday pay? No. We are excluded. Are we first class? Are we second class? Or do we have no class in Canada? Let me go to T. T. We have a tied work permit. We are tied to an employer. Are we free or are we unfree in Canada? Where are we talking about? Canada, the land of freedom, the country that prides itself on diversity, multiculturalism, and so on. Are we really free in Canada? And we are made invisible. So let me summarize these three things. T, to be tied to our employer, to be denied so much and excluded from so much. How do we call that? I'm tied to my employer. I am denied so much basic things and excluded from so much. How do we call that? And that is the program that put foods on your table, that's putting food on your table. Consistently, Canada have programs in place that dehumanize and that exploit people. Dehumanize and exploit people. Canada is saying, when you buy local, you know what Canada is saying? Canada is saying, quietly, you're perpetuating difficult conditions. Quietly, you're perpetuating exploitation. Quietly, you are demonizing people. You're contributing to that. Canada has a culture of silence. Canada has a culture of silence. Are you part of the silence? And what does silence mean? We are complicit. What does silence mean? We are complicit. The loudest language in the world, the loudest noise in my head, was your silence. The loudest noise in my head was your silence. The loudest noise in my head was your silence. In America, they're loud about it and bold about it. But Canada is quiet about it. And it was because of your silence. That's why I came to Canada. Because no news in my country is good news. No news is good news. You say nothing. So that means everything must be right. The loudest noise in my head was your silence. The most common language in Canada, is not English, is not French, is not Spanish. The most common language in Canada is the language you don't hear. It is silence, the language of the poor and the marginalized. The language of the poor and the marginalized. And what did COVID teach us? The poor and the marginalized, these are the people who are in the front line. During the COVID, what did they ask you? Stay at home, stay at home, stay at home. Were you not forced to think about where your food is going to come from? How reliable is my food supply? Were you not forced to think about it? Let me tell you, even the government, right now, there are no more migrant workers in Canada because what happened during COVID? Migrant workers got a promotion. We got a promotion. What is the promotion? Essential workers. Essential. The nice and comforting words of the politician. Essential workers. But what do we get in return? It's a lot of disrespect, abuse, and again, it's exploitation. Let us go on. The three pillars of the program that brought me into Canada, the three pillars is just like a tree. The program that brought me into Canada, it started in 1966. So this year it's 57 years. When I look at the pictures I can see on my screen, none of you look 57. You look younger than that. And even Ellen looks like 16. I need to see your birth certificate, Ellen, because you look 16. And the program started in 1966. So this is 57 years. Listen to the three pillars of that program. We are here to do jobs Canadians do not want to do. We are here to do jobs Canadians do not want to do. Let's talk about that. The jobs Canadians do not want to do. Even during COVID, when unemployment was so high, I thought Canadians would go to the farm and produce their food because stay at home, the food is important, right? Even during crisis, Canadians do not want to do the work. Why? Because it is D jobs, class D, dirty work, difficult work, dangerous work, deadly work. Imagine an average of 2 workers are dying every year. Every year, an average of 2 workers are dying. If workers are dying, can you imagine how many more are getting injured? I want you to think for a minute. These D jobs we're doing, the dirty, difficult, dangerous, deadly jobs, they are non-unionized work. Can you imagine for a minute doing non-unionized work? So we are here to do the jobs Canadians do not want to do. Another pillar of that program, we have a tied work permit. We are tied to our employer. We cannot work for anybody else. We cannot work for anybody else. So we are tied to our employer to do the dirty work, the difficult work, the D jobs. And the other pillar of that program, we cannot apply for status. We cannot apply for status. Let me see that here. We cannot apply for status. And that is why there's that campaign for status. Now let us talk a little about status. Let me tell you, in my home country, when I have a lot of pain, I take Panadol, Tylenol, Advil. In Canada, when migrant workers have a lot of pain, we take status. What is status? Status is a two-edged sword. What is a two-edged sword? It cuts 2 ways. Status is a two-edged sword. Status is a two-edged sword. If I have status, it takes care of my labor vulnerabilities. What I mean, if I have status, I can work for literally anybody that can willing to employ me. If I have status, I have an open work permit. If I have status, I can refuse unsafe work. I can choose my employer. Right now, I don't have status. I have a tied work permit. I'm tied to my employer. Isn't that the recipe for exploitation, to be tied to somebody? If you're tied to somebody, you're vulnerable. If you're tied to somebody, you're vulnerable. You depend on that person. And at the same time, look at that. I'm tied to that person, I'm vulnerable, and I'm denied so much, and I'm excluded from so much. Isn't that the recipe for exploitation? So if I have status, I have an open work permit. I can refuse unsafe work. If I have status, status takes care of my labor vulnerabilities, and status also takes care of my immigration vulnerability. What does that mean? If I have status, I'm not concerned about deporting me, sending me back home, because I have status, I can stay in Canada. Status is a two-edged sword. It takes care of my labor vulnerabilities, and it takes care of my immigration vulnerabilities. So what is the painkiller? What is the remedy for a lot of the problems that migrant workers face? Status. Let me tell you a couple of other things. In Canada, okay, let me start this way. Food, clothing, shelter. Food, clothing, shelter. Food, clothing, shelter. These are basic necessities. Food, clothing, shelter. In Canada, food is not a basic necessity. In Canada, food is not a basic necessity. In Canada, food is a commodity. Food is a money, a financial commodity. Food is profit. Canada is very productive, very productive. If all the food that's been produced in Canada is allowed to go to the market, the real cost of food would be well within our means. In Canada, there's something that's called the supply management. Supply management. What is supply management? You control the supply of the goods on the market. And whenever you control the supply, what are you aiming to do? You're aiming to control the price, control profit. You're aiming for profit. Canada has a supply management. And in Ontario, you know what I keep hearing from my friends? If we know the amount of milk that's been dumped, just to make sure that the supply remains at a level where the price is very profitable. Are you aware of that? And the other issue is, a lot of these things are made invisible. We are invisible. And the other thing is, the more disconnected we are from the land, the more disconnected we are from our food, the less concerned we are. Are you concerned about how your food is being grown? Are you concerned whether it's been grown by those who respect the soil, respect the environment, respect workers? Or you're not concerned whether they exploit the soil, exploit the environment, exploit workers? Are you concerned? Where do you stand? I want to tell you, in Canada, it is legal. It is legal to exploit the soil, to exploit the environment, to exploit migrant workers. It is legal. It's not an illegal program. And the question is, things that are legal, does that make them right? Who are the politicians? Who are the politicians loyal to? You, the voter, me, the worker, or the donors? Who are the politicians really loyal to? The voters, the workers, or the donors? Your silence is complicit in the current system of exploitation. Let us move on. As a migrant farm worker, I was counting injustices, counting, and I stop at 20 injustices. 20. What I want to tell you, not only they are 20, but they are at every level of government. Is that an accident? Or is that by design? As I said, Canada consistently have programs in place that dehumanize and exploit people. Consistently have programs in place that dehumanize and exploit people. And that is why the whole system is designed to dehumanize migrant workers and exploit. I want to tell you, your food system, your food security, how secure are you with your food? It depends on how you treat the migrant workers. I believe, and I hope you believe too, the food that you eat can be the safest form of your medicine. If we eat well, food is our medicine. I also believe that the food we eat can also be the slowest form of our poison. If we don't eat well, then they say medicine will be our food. Are you concerned about your food? Are you concerned about your food? Let us take it another step. In Ontario, the laws that are designed to protect workers in Ontario, migrant workers are excluded from that. Things like minimum wage. You know what's minimum? Minimum wage. Migrant workers are excluded from those things. Minimum. Now, in a country where it talks about, where we're talking about minimum, you know what's minimum? Minimum. What? I want to spend some time to emphasize that. Minimum. You know what's bare minimum? You know what's minimum, bare minimum? That is what migrant workers are getting, bare minimum. Now, let us talk about bare minimum. When you have a country talking about minimum wage and not a living wage, that country is talking about profit before people. Profit comes before people. And a country where profit comes before people is that people are not seen as people. It's easy to dehumanize. It's easy to exploit people. Now, is that the system that we want? Profit. Now, let's talk about minimum wage. From minimum wage, let's talk a little about that. From minimum wage, migrant workers do not get overtime pay. We excluded from that. As I said, recently was a holiday. We don't get holiday pay, and so we excluded from those things. Let's talk about minimum wage. We do not get overtime pay. The laws that are designed to protect workers, migrant workers, are excluded from that. We are excluded from overtime pay. Let us go again. We are excluded from minimum wage. We are excluded from sick leave and so many other things that we excluded from. The only thing that migrant workers are entitled to is called occupational health and safety. What does that mean on paper? Migrant workers can refuse, they have the right to refuse unsafe work. Let's talk about that. We have a right to refuse unsafe work. But let's talk about it. If you have somebody who's tied and denied and excluded from so much, that was important. In truth and the fact, can that person really refuse unsafe work? And in the first place, why are we here? To do dirty work, difficult work, dangerous, deadly work. Can we refuse unsafe work? Can we really and truly refuse unsafe work? The employer controls the travel agency that's booking your flight in and out of the country. Can you really and truly refuse unsafe work? So on paper, it looks nice. It may sound nice. And in practice, it is something you cannot access, you don't have access to. Let us move on. The food that we eat, there are many, many, many injustices, many. On the world stage, I do not have a flag of Canada with me because I didn't travel for a lot of props. I like to use props. But when you look at the flag of Canada, Ellen, do you have one? When you look at the flag of Canada, it's red and white. In my home country, red and white means love. Red and white means love. I don't know if it's the same here in Canada, but red and white. Whenever you see somebody dressed in red and white in my country, know that love is in the air. Red and white means love. I personally have benefited from the love of Canada. Canada is a loving country. And do not get me wrong. I'm not saying Canadians are bad. I'm not saying the politicians are bad. I'm not saying the consumers are bad. I'm not saying the farmers are bad. I'm not saying the students are bad. I'm not saying society is bad. No. What I'm saying is the policies of the politicians are unfair and unjust. The unjust policies of the politicians. And to make it worse, they make us invisible and so on and so on. So you're disconnected from these things. So let me go back to the flag of Canada. Red and white means love. And I've felt the love of Canada in so many ways in my home country. That is one reason why I wrote the book, because Canada is a loving country. On the world stage, what does Canada say? A champion for human rights. Canada is not just a country. Canada is a standard. People look up to Canada. People look up to Canada. The question is, is your voice part of that standard, or is your silence part of that standard? Let us go on. In my home country, red means danger. Red means danger. When I look at the flag of Canada, I see a red leaf. A red leaf. In my home country in school, what did they tell me? What did we learn? That the food that we harvest, we eat, they're synthesized in the leaves of green plants. Synthesized in the leaves of green plants. To me, every time I see a leaf, it should be green. To me, every time I see a leaf, it should be green. To remain your food, that factory where our food has been made naturally. But when I see a red leaf on the flag reminds me of the 20 injustices that migrant workers go through to put food on your table. 20 injustices. The red leaf is a constant reminder of the injustice, the dangers that migrant workers face. Are you aware of that? Is that an accident? Or is that by design? I want to go on and tell you that on the world stage, Canada is a champion for human rights. But up to now, Canada has failed to sign and ratified the UN Convention on the Rights of Migrants and their Families. A champion for human rights. Canada is a champion. People look up to Canada. A champion for human, but they failed to sign and ratify the UN Convention on the Rights of Migrant Workers and their Families. What does that tell you? Canada has one image on the world stage, but quietly Canada perpetuates difficult working and living conditions. Now let's talk about that. What does being a migrant worker mean in Canada? To be a migrant worker in Canada, it means both our living and working conditions are difficult. Both our living and working conditions. Let me talk about our living conditions. Let us talk a little about our living conditions. Where do we live? Where do we live? In the city? No. Where do we live? On the farm? Yes. What is the farm? Private property, no trespassing. Private property, no trespassing. Are we integrated into society? No. Private property. According to a professor, you know what they said? We are permanently temporary. They see us as seasonal, temporary. But from 1966, we are still temporary. What does temporary mean? From 1966, 57 years. Does temporary mean 57 years? Let us go to our living conditions. Some of the elements of our living conditions, let me tell you, some of the elements of our living conditions. One, we are invisible. You don't see us. We live on the farm. We live on the farm. We're invisible. Number two, overcrowding. Overcrowding. In the bunkhouse where I live, there were 62 of us. In my room, I had 8 guys. 62 of us. There were free stoves with 16 burners. Do the math, 62 guys to 16 burners. There were 4 washers, 4 dryers. Do the math. Is it surprising all night long people had to walk back and forth to the washer, to the dryer? Do the math. There were a few refrigerators. There were, in terms of microwave, less than 10 microwaves. Because of very limited appliances, there was always competition. Let me take the microwaves, for example. Because of very limited stove, my co-workers, and in my home country, look at how our life changed. In my home country, we would cook fresh food every day, from scratch, fresh food every day. That's our culture. In Canada, because of our working conditions, our living conditions, we were forced to cook food to last a couple of days. Now, when you cook food to last a couple of days, it means that during lunchtime, my colleagues had to use the microwave. So there was competition. All of us are using the same, it's the same lunch hour. We have the same work schedule. Everybody, 62 guys in the bunkers running for 6, 7, 8 microwaves, right? So you can see the competition for one lunch hour. And to warm up the food, how long does it take? I don't know, a couple of minutes, and multiply that by how many workers, right? So you can see what the living conditions were in that sense. For me personally, I've never, ever used the microwave on the farm. That's not part of my culture. Microwave is not, I'm accustomed to fresh food being cooked every day. For me now, how did I work around it? I had to get up 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning to use the stove. That's when most of my colleagues were sleeping, because most of them would cook in the night. So in the morning time, they would get up a little later because they would prepare breakfast, and breakfast took less time to prepare. So I would get up 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning when the kitchen was generally empty. And because I cook the food every day in the morning, I do not have to use the microwave. But trust me, 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, that's the warmest time to be in the bed. That's the best time to be in the bed, and I had to give that up. So my day started at 4 and 5 in the morning. The real cost of food, the real cost of the food that you eat, if I tell the real cost of the food that you eat, it's a lot. The price that we pay is a lot. And you know what they tell you in Canada? Canada tells you that they do everything to keep the cost of food down, down. So that means, listen to that. You know what the employers are saying, the farmers are saying? We cannot control the sun, we cannot control the environment, we cannot control rainfall, we cannot control blah, we cannot control that, but we can control the price we pay to migrant workers. We cannot control this, but we can control migrant workers. And who is a migrant worker in Canada? We are tied to the employer, denied so much, excluded from so much. From the very Constitution of Canada, we are denied, we are dehumanized. Are we first class? Are we second class? Or do we have no class in Canada? In terms of time, how am I doing? I'm not sure because I'm in a different time zone. Let me just see.
Okay, we're at 11:07, and I think one thing that we would like to know, if you have time to include that, is what can we do?
Beautiful. What can we do? That's $1 million question. The beautiful thing about it is there are 1 million things that can be done. 1 million. That's the beautiful thing about it. 1 million things can be done. The question is, do you want a band-aid solution or do you want a permanent solution? What is a band-aid solution? You can provide food for that person. You can provide this band-aid solution. That does not get to the root of it. To get to the root of it, we need to create a just society, a just system. And the politicians need to change those unjust laws. How do you get you know what the politicians are saying? That's not an issue in my riding. That's not an issue. Is your congregation aware of the issues? And then they've been pushed to push the politician. Are they concerned about the food? How the food is being educate your congregation about that. Bring the issues to the awareness. Awaken the awareness. The question is, what skill do you have and how you want to use your skill? That's one. Number two, do you want a band-aid solution or do you want a permanent solution? And as I said, status is it's more or less like the cure for all. It takes care of immigration and labor vulnerabilities. Can you grant status to the workers? No. Who can grant status to the workers? The politicians. How do you get to the politicians? The voters. How do you get to them? They're right there in your congregation. Do we have questions? I don't know. I'm not very good at managing time, and I was trying to talk a little slow so that I could be clear.
You actually have lots of time, so if you want to talk some more, that's fine too.
Let me take some more questions. Let me take some questions,
Sure.
and it can guide the conversation, I guess.
Anybody want to? I'm going to go like this. Anybody want to ask a question or so forth? Just unmute yourself and ask away.
Okay, thanks very much. Really inspiring and awakening. I'm from a Windsor area originally, so I'm very familiar with the Essex County migrant workers in the fields there. And you mentioned they were made essential workers during the pandemic. I don't know if that was across all of Canada or just Ontario, but what did they actually get out of that particular change in the description? Anything?
I don't know. I want to ask you a question. Where can you buy the dictionary that the politicians use? The dictionary that the politicians use is so comforting. The politicians use such comforting words, right? Essential workers, right? That's so comforting. It makes you feel, peace of mind. It brings some element of a reassurance and peace of mind. But the very, very, very comforting words of the politicians are nothing close to the reality of migrant workers. And what is the reality of migrant workers? We still face all the issues. It's just like I'm telling you, it's bad to compare, but it's just like this here, right? The Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the 94 calls to action. What does the government preach? The comforting words of the politicians. I need to buy the dictionary that they use, reconciliation, reconciliation, reconciliation. And yesterday or day before, I was at a conference, and they said that out of the 94 calls to action, Canada is at number 13. And it's not a month, it's not a year, it's a couple of years since they're still working on that, right? The point I want to bring here is, look at it, the comforting words of the politicians. Reconciliation, reconciliation, that's the comforting words, right? Where are they in terms of action? No. So to answer your question about essential worker, the comforting words of the politician, where are the actions? Where are the actions to match it? No. Because look at that. A government that's talking about minimum wage. You know what's minimum? minimum wage. And let me talk about minimum wage. Even from the minimum wage, let me take the government itself. The government is drawing EI. And I'm pretty sure I would assume everybody knows EI, right? The government is drawing EI from workers. And the way the program is designed, the workers come here seasonally for a period of time and they go back home. Now, the period, let me take me as an example. I used to come to Canada, 8 months, go back home, 8 months, go back home, right? When I return to my country, there's high unemployment. And even though there's an opportunity for me to get employment, would they want to employ me? And they know, the employer knows I'll be going back to Canada very soon. Will they want to employ me? No. So the government is drawing EI from me, and I cannot access EI. And I cannot access EI because they designed the rules. After I'm getting minimum wage, after I'm getting minimum, you know what's minimum wage? And then still drawing EI from me, and they know full well I cannot access EI. The comforting words of the politician. The same guy that's giving the impression, oh, these are the best people to have. Look at quietly under the table that they really perpetuating difficult working and living conditions. I want to beg you to. I want to bring your attention to two things, right? What are the two things? There's a documentary that's called Life and Debt, L-I-F-E, and Debt, D-E-B-T. I would encourage you to watch it, that documentary. It really spells out the institutions that are there to create that wide divide between the global north, and well, the developed countries and the developing countries, or the global south. Life and debt. In a nutshell, let me see if I can summarize a few things here. Life and debt. Jamaica, for example, was self-sufficient in milk and a lot of other stuff because of life and debt and institutions like the World Bank and so on. They force us into a cycle of debt, being caught up in a vicious cycle of debt that you cannot get out of. Debt, life and debt. And because of that, a lot of the, in other words, in a nutshell, a lot of the income of those countries go to servicing debt. You're trapped into debt. And because of that, servicing debt, you have less money to take care of social programs and so on. So basically, your economy continues to contract, not creating hope, and where people are forced to displace and become migrant workers. And when you become a migrant worker, you're caught up, you're sandwiched between a rock and a hard place. In your home country, you have difficult conditions. Come to Canada, you face even more difficult conditions. So who is a migrant worker? A sandwich. We are caught between a rock and a hard place. Let us talk a little more about EI. That is why there's a group of people in Montreal. They file a case in the court. I don't know which court. There are different levels of court. And they ask in the court, is it right? Is it fair? Is it just for migrant workers to be on a tied work permit, a closed work permit or tied work permit, to be tied to your employer? Because when you're tied to your employer, and what does Canada say? Canada says we are a country of rights. The Charter of Rights. We have rights. Right, free, what is it called? The Charter of Rights. How is it explained? I have freedom to religion, freedom of this, freedom of expression, freedom. But yet still, in a country of freedom, we are tied to our employer. What is the freedom? So there's some people in Montreal, they file that charter, I think it's called the Charter Challenge, the Charter of Rights. How can you say you have all those rights and yet still you can tie people and limit their rights? So that is one. Another group of people in Ontario, they haven't done it, but pretty soon, they told me that they'll be filing another case in the court where they're going to ask the court, is it right? Is it fair? Is it just to draw or to take or to deduct EI from migrant workers, where and the government will full well that the migrant workers cannot access EI? A social safety net, it's a legal deduction. You're allowing the workers to contribute to it, but you know full well they cannot access it. And they're the ones who need it the most. They're vulnerable, they're marginalized, minimum. So they're asking the court, is it right? Is it fair? Is it just for the government of Canada to draw EI from workers And the people who need it the most, they cannot access it. So the court will. So that is where the nice words of the politician, the comforting words of the politician, does not meet with the actions. And that is why some people, and who are the people? You think it's migrant workers who can take that to court? It's people who are concerned, grassroots organizations who are concerned and fighting back for and with migrant workers.
I have a question.
Yes.
One of the things that we have been following a little bit, although maybe not as concertedly as we might, I know that there is a movement to get Parliament to regularize status for migrant workers and other undocumented workers. Do you know how that's going? I know that there have been rallies and protests and letters, and we've written some of those letters. Do you have any sense of how that's going? Is there any movement on it?
Yeah, there's some movement, but the thing is that yesterday I was at a conference and the Minister of IRCC was there, and the language of the politicians are so comforting, but the actions are not. The actions are not, the policies are not, right? And it takes a lot of people. As I said, it's the constituents, the people in the writing who have to push the politicians, because not until it becomes an issue for them, they will not push. You understand? So that is where the issue comes in. Even though that there's a lot of rallies and so on, but it ends up to action. And what is the action? To push your politicians, and that is where that becomes really, really, really important. And ultimately, it is the power in our hands to push the politician that will really create that change that is so needed. And again, it boils down to that: how disconnected we are. Are we concerned? And even are we aware? Because we are made invisible. And it takes me to the book here now. Let me tell you some of the reasons why I wrote that book. One, I wrote that book, you know why? Because I'm concerned about you and I'm concerned about myself. I want a Canadian food system that is healthy, that is sustainable, and that is just. I want a food system that's healthy, sustainable, and just. That's one reason why I wrote that book. Another reason why I wrote that book, I wrote that book because I want to bring hope and to bring freedom. I want to bring hope to all those people, documented, undocumented, worked on tied work permits and denied so much, excluded from so much. I want to bring hope to these people. I want to bring freedom to these people. I want to bring freedom to myself. Now, let me talk a little about myself. My father was of Indian descent, and descendants of my father came into the Caribbean as indentured workers, exploited labor. My mother is of African descent, and she's descendants of Africans who came to be exploited as slaves. I carry one leg of exploitation as indentured worker, another leg as slave, exploited labor, and I come to Canada to take part in another form of exploited labor. So the mother, so the father, so the son. When will that stop? I wrote that book to stop exploitation in my family. Another reason why I wrote that book is all the ease you can think of to educate people, to enlighten people, to empower people, to embolden people, to expose the issues. All the ease you can think of. Why I want to do that? Because we are made invisible. Invisible. You do not hear our stories. Another reason why I wrote that book, not only we're made invisible, Canada has a culture of silence. Nobody talks about it. They said, as I said a while ago, the program started in 1966, 57 years. They said in 57 years, nobody has ever published their story. In my country, no news is good news. 57 years of no news. Is that good news? 57 years is because of fear. 57 years is because of vulnerability. 57 years is because of oppressive conditions. And where is it happening? In the country that prides itself on rights, equality, diversity. Are you going to be a spectator and watch? Or are you going to be a fighter and fight for fairness and equality? And I want to tell you, I wrote this book. Not only are we invisible, not only Canada has a culture of silence, but I say to myself, I say Canada has 5 PhDs. A lot of Canadians have 5 PhDs. I say 5 PhDs. And they're all Ds, right? Listen to 5 Ds of Canada. A lot of Canadians, they have a PhD in D. What is D? They like to deny. That does not exist. Deny. Another PhD is to downplay. It's not as bad. It's worse in the US. Another PhD, they like to derail it, deflect the conversation, or even delay the conversation. These are some of the reasons why I wrote that book. Your silence is complicit in the exploitation that's happening. Are you awakened or are you asleep?